Hello, and welcome to the Fair Deal Democrats podcast, hosted by me, Josh Kilroy. Thank you for joining us. We've got a guest, Evan Brown, who will be joining us in just a minute. I just want to take an opportunity to thank you all for being here. The Fair Deal Democrats is a recognized super PAC that is devoted to promoting moderate Democratic candidates. Our larger project is the rejuvenation of America, modernizing our economy, building housing and the infrastructure that we need, creating military set for the 21st century. And our strategy for working towards these goals is to rebuild a Democratic Party that can effectively advocate for those. So that'll be the sort of overarching theme of our various episodes. And today I am honored to be joined by my old friend, Evan Brown. So Evan is a writer, performer, educator, and public affairs strategist. His writing has appeared in The Hill, HuffPost, Politico, and TheOnion.com. Although I feel like I did you a disservice by not leading with TheOnion.com.
I mean, it's one of my proudest. So there you go.
His political work has included a stint as a senior staffer for the DNC. And most recently, he served as campaign manager for Connecticut State Representative Nick Gauthier. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's either way, yeah.
Who unseated a 5-term Republican incumbent last November. Evan also appears on stage in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and just completed a book on the early history of Southeast Connecticut, which I look forward to reading at some point.
Yes.
So. Right. I would suggest the title, So Close Yet So Far. We Were Almost Rhode Islanders. The history.
Yeah, funny. No, Rhode Island shows up. Roger Williams is in the book, so don't worry about it. Yeah, right. Yep.
Right.
No, the mixed and uncertain character and an unorthodox history of New London County. So there you go. That's
right.
Hey, do you want to hear the end thing that I got in? I got in one. I was an approved writer. I got one headline in. Astronaut just not feeling it this mission. That was it. So
great.
At your service. There you go.
Great. So I wanted to start the conversation with a pretty serious topic.
Yeah.
Over the weekend, Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman was assassinated, and her husband Mark was killed as well. The assassin also shot at a state senator and his wife. And this has been part of a continuing string of political violence, the likes that we have not seen perhaps since the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s.
68 is what I would pin this to, yeah.
Right, yes. But, yes. And it's a festering tale because George Wallace was in 72 and there were civil rights leaders killed all the way up.
Oh, sure. It seems like it's, when you talk about like days of rage and assassinations and stuff.
Right.
This is where we're at. Yeah.
And, it's, I just think of, the politics I've known all my life, which I would now, I consider normal politics. And it feels like the old rules don't apply. And it is scary. And it's, we look for, people to blame, things to blame. How are you making sense of sort of, because I know this is an issue you've thought about, we've talked about it some in the past, but how are we getting unhinged from the values that made us such a great nation?
Because the modern media environment, throughout all of media, but especially with online and social media, incentivizes radicalism. It just does. Controversy is currency. And so you have a Democratic Party that's lost in certain ways. Like, I think that the media narrative that it was a complete wipeout last election is factually untrue. I mean, it just is. We didn't lose a single governor seat. We gained House seats, right? But, so there you go. That's the narrative. The Democrats are done. They're crazy. And part of it, though, is absolutely due to Democrats' fault. And I am sure that Fair Deal Democrats will not disagree with me on this.
No, not at all.
We have been complacent in terms of turning down the rhetoric on our side, particularly by allowing the most extreme voices to be heard more than they should be. And you see what happened to the Republican Party. They didn't nip that in the bud, and now that is the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a far-right radical organization. And I don't think that's going to that way with Democrats. But what it does do is make us so it creates such internal dissension that we can't find a cogent way forward. The Republicans found a way forward. It's Trump. We don't have a Trump, thank goodness, and we're not going to have a Trump if I have anything to do about it.
Right.
But you know what? I'm going to ask one question. Why is Rashida Tlaib still a Democrat in good standing?
There you go. That's an excellent.
Why is a person who actively campaigned against our president and then our presidential nominee still a Democrat?
Right. Right.
You know, I mean, that's the problem we're facing here. And so that's really what it is there is this massive center. They're still there. And they are beside themselves because they, you know, it's the Steelers Wheels song, like the clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, you know? And it really is. We look like a bunch of clowns and Donald Trump acts like the Joker. So, you know, I mean, he's just he is chaotic evil. If you were playing him as a character in Dungeons and Dragons, he is a chaotic evil character. And so that's where we're at. I mean, you have the bully pulpit occupied by a bully. And then you have us on our side tripping over ourselves to stay in this little narrow range of ideological purity and political correctness that is so frequently at odds with what we actually would like to accomplish, which I'm going to give the radical proposition is winning elections.
Right. Hey, right.
I know, crazy Evan, but
Well, absolutely.
How did we lose unions? How did we lose the majority of union members?
Right.
You know, we ask the question, but nobody's seriously trying to answer it.
Right. Well, that in particular is an interesting question because Joe Biden, more than any president, since Carter, maybe even further back, worked really hard on union issues. He
had that support in 2020. He did.
Right.
It's one of the reasons he got some of the non-college educated white union workers back because of his Joe Bidenness.
Right.
But then, you know, 4 years later, there were a lot of things. Obviously, he made a number of mistakes. I'm not going to try. I love Joe Biden, but I'm not going to sit here and, you know, try to carry water for stuff that has a hole in the bucket, you know, like.
Right.
However, his message was frequently, I mean, Republicans are a stop clock, right? They're right twice a day, right? So when you have people who are camping out and threatening Jewish students in our bastions of learning, and they get tepid pushback at best, sometimes encouragement, right?
That's right.
People are going to look at that and go, I like Joe Biden, but I don't like his party.
Right.
You know? And that's what it is. I'm not saying that you know, the people who support I don't like dead kids in the streets. Okay. I mean, as far as I'm concerned with the conflict, I know it's a source of great controversy. Here's what I've been saying. If you condemn Hamas without condemning the Netanyahu government, or condemn the Netanyahu government without condemning Hamas, you're just basically picking the murderers you like. Just choose your murderers of choice, you know, like that's it, you know. They're murdering people gleefully. And so, but it becomes this thing because of the polarization, because it's yay red, yay blue. You pick a side, you get entrenched in that side, you lose any perspective or objectivity about what you should be doing on yours. And all it becomes is about facing off against the other, the enemy. Right?
Exactly.
Well, the enemy itself is this kind of conflict. It's like in Crimson Tide, the great, you know, movie with Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman. You know, anybody who hasn't seen it, the birthday of the U.S. Navy is coming up, the 250th, and They're not getting a party, apparently, but you can watch Crimson Tide. And they're talking about they're on a nuclear submarine, which in New London, Connecticut is very close to our hearts because we make them and we have them. He says in a nuclear world, the enemy is war itself. And that is what we're looking at right now. This dynamic is the enemy. So it doesn't matter which side you're on, you are participating on the side that is going to erode our fabric as a
Right.
democratic constitutional republic. That's it.
Right. One issue, going back to Biden and losing the union vote, I think that immigration is one of the big issues that really drove that sort of losing control of the southern border in the way that he did for the first 3 years of his administration. Um, when I first met you, you were covering immigration politics in Maricopa County, among other things. And in 2008, when I was there, I got to see immigration politics in action. And Maricopa County was in this grip of a mania, and it was a real raw anger. If you could speak, to what you experienced there as a journalist and what you're seeing now. I mean, we had immigration protests the week before, cars were lit on fire,
Yeah,
people
and
were
like
here.
one block of, sorry,
Yeah,
as a native Angelino, anybody who's listening who's never been to Los Angeles does not understand. It's really freaking big.
yes,
And, I'm originally from the Valley. I'm a Valley dude, man, and yeah, it didn't, yeah, there's nothing like that in the San Fernando Valley. It was downtown near the federal facility. And yeah, some cars got lit on fire. That shouldn't happen. But you know what? That's going to happen when you have a president who is bent on fomenting political violence. He loves it.
he
Okay,
does.
but let's get back to Maricopa County because speaking of people who like to foment unrest, America's Sheriff Joe Arpaio,
Right.
may he rest in hell. Sorry.
That's right.
Am I sorry? Am I sorry? Because as a journalist, I got to tell you, the most dangerous place in the world was between Joe Arpaio and a news camera. Like, that's, I
Right.
mean, he didn't care. Immigration was his thing when I got to Arizona. I parachuted in. I'd spent very minuscule time in Arizona prior to being a reporter there. And his thing was like truancy for a while, and his, like, he just chose whatever issue was going to get him the most publicity. And immigration was that issue in the late aughts and early teens.
Right.
And so, what I saw was that, well, obviously, Arizona is a flashpoint. It's a border state. It has a very long border with Mexico. And of course, it is at the heart of immigration politics generally because you have this push and pull between people who migrated there from, a lot of them from the Midwest. Josh, we certainly had a massive Chicagoan contingent, in there because here your winters are cold. But a lot of people had moved there, during a boom that sort of continued, and they thought they were going to the Wild West. Honest to God, they thought they were going to like go out there and like be facing off against Injuns, and like that's their mindset, even though they're an insurance adjuster, like they're, oh yeah, we're gonna defend the border and all this. As their gardener is from Sonora and undocumented. And they love Jorge, I mean, so it's the schizophrenia about that, right? But when you activate people, you activate that sort of animus within them. Obviously, othering is very powerful, right? You create a sense of insecurity in people, and then you show where that insecurity comes from. And now you have permission to do basically whatever you want, like with Joe Arpaio kicking in doors. I think one of his mass arrests, they arrested over 300 people, and 16 of them were undocumented. That's what it was. But I'll tell you, I mean, so in the interest of not both sidism, but being fair, when I went from journalism to working in politics, and I was the Arizona comms director for Organizing for America, we passed the Affordable Care Act with the very heroic help of Harry Mitchell, who should be remembered. because he
Right.
knew he was going to lose in 2010 and did, forecasting that vote. And so we won. We won this huge, huge victory. And you see it now. It's 15 years later. It was a huge victory for America, for American citizens, right? Then I was tasked with trying to lead, get this groundswell of people for the Dodd-Frank Act. All right. You could be forgiven for not knowing what the Dodd-Frank Act is because it was the most landmark piece of financial regulation legislation that did virtually nothing to address any of the problems that led to the financial meltdown. So, and I was talking to the DNC, I was talking to all of them. I'm going, the reporters who I have a good relationship with, reporters who are friends of mine, who I go drinking with, have told me point blank in Arizona, if you are not talking about SB 1070, which was the draconian anti-immigration bill that Joe Arpaio was the face of, if you're not talking about that, then we don't want to hear about anything else. And so I kick it up the channels. And they said, the president released a statement. Rely on that statement. I said, the president released a statement a month ago and it was 2 sentences long. And they said, well, that's the president's statement. I'm like, well, that's not news.
Right.
That's not a news story. 2 sentences spoken a month ago is not a news story. And they're like, how are you coming on the bank bill? I'm like, not great. Not great. So there you go. So if we had taken that time, if we had focused on it and sussed out, the solution to the basic outlines of the solution to our immigration crisis have always been there. They've been there since George W. freaking Bush tried to get it through the Senate in 05, 06. Increase border security, more immigration judges, kick out the criminals like Trump is supposed to be doing, except he's not. He's spending more time trying to get money from them and pardoning them than he is kicking any. And then, go to the back of the line, pay fines, pay back taxes, and have a pathway to say it's never changed. It hasn't changed in 20 years.
Right.
It was the same last year in the bill that Trump scuttled. It was going to pass. And it was the same thing. So both sides have been kind of disingenuous about things because then there's also Ayanna Pressley, who went on Jake Tapper last year, or 2023 maybe. And he's like, so how are Democrats addressing the crisis at the border? And she goes, there is no crisis at the border.
Right.
And he was like, okay, well, I understand, you may think that it's overblown. And I know that Joe Biden has been trying to keep Title 42 in place, which just look it up. I'm not going to go into it, but So what do you think? What can be addressed? There is no crisis at the border. We don't have a border crisis. And Jake Tapper looked at her and wanted to be like, have you lost your day? I'm giving you everything I can for you to say something relevant and true.
Right.
But nope, up in Massachusetts with the squad, there is no crisis at the border.
Right. But even worse is when they say things like abolish ICE or
defund the
open
police.
borders.
The three stupidest words in the history of American politics.
Right. So, yeah, it's about building a movement that can speak without getting stuck on foolish slogans like that.
Right. Or keep it behind closed doors, man. Or have that conversation and then come out as a united front.
Right.
That's what we used to do. Yeah.
Right. But one of the good news out of last weekend, and a direct counterpoint to the protests in Los Angeles, were the No Kings protests across the nation.
That's not a counterpoint. How's that a counterpoint? My sister was one of the people helping to carry the giant Constitution through downtown LA. Those aren't separate things. The protests in LA have been largely peaceful. There has been some violence, but mainly that was after curfew. It's the same thing that plays out over and over. The same thing that happened in Minnesota in 2020. Thousands of people come out. They express themselves. They utilize their First Amendment rights. And then 200 people go and cause shit.
Right. But I would say that to the, I walked through around some of the local protests here, I found the messaging to be refreshingly on point
Mm-hmm.
and openly patriotic.
Oh yeah.
Like American flags were the only ones I saw. Foreign countries
Yeah.
or the anarchist flag, God forbid, or
Hammer and
so
sickle. Yeah. Yeah. None of
right.
that. None of that. Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I really was
It was
optimistic.
phenomenal. It's exactly what we should be doing. Absolutely. There was a
Right.
protest. I helped organize a protest at the Coast Guard Academy when Christy Nome was giving the commencement address. And that was our messaging is very much pro Coast Guard. We love our coasties, actually. And you know what? If you want to be like that, the Navy and Coast Guard are the highest with force we'll argue, but pound for pound, the Navy and Coast Guard have the highest propensity of education and the
Mhm.
lowest propensity for Trump support. It's amazing how
Interesting.
that correlates. I mean, it's weird, right?
No, it is.
But so we showed up. We were right outside the grounds. But here's the thing: all American flags, only positive towards. And this was a dry run, so this was like 2 weeks before the No Kings protest. Um, and it went over huge. It went over great. We got national cover. The AP covered us because they were covering the commencement address. They covered us, and the AP was like, protesters were sure to say they were not protesting the graduating Coast Guard cadets, and were in fact very helpful and welcoming and saying congratulations because that's what it should be. You see what happened at Fort Bragg should scare the shit out of everybody. Should scare the living shit. Pardon my I don't know what rating this podcast is going to have, but should scare the ever loving poopy out of everybody in this country because you were talking about people in military who dress active duty military, know they're on camera, jeering their commander in chief. Is the person who's their commander in chief 6 months ago, and cheering on things that are blatantly unconstitutional.
Right. So just
That should scare us a lot. But we responded exactly the right way. 5 million people on the street.
yes.
The only violence coming from the right. I love that Fox News is like, yes, protests marred by violence. And who was conducting that violence,
Right.
perchance?
Right.
And of course it freaked out Donald Trump, which is great because every time he loses a size battle, he acts even more erratically and makes terrible decisions that further alienate him from the majority of the population.
Right. Right.
So, short of there actually being a martial law declared in a military coup, which is a possibility, this guy wants a civil war. I'm going to say it. This guy wants a civil war. I feel like he essentially declared a soft civil war on January 20th by pardoning the January 6th insurrectionists. He said, our political violence is fine. Your protests are illegal. If that is not the prelude to a manufactured crisis, then I have never seen one.
Right. And so, to sort of circle back and tie this into where we started, having the pardoning of the January 6th insurrectionists, I think directly encourages people like the person in Minnesota who felt emboldened enough to shoot politicians. We now know he was visiting other politicians' homes. They just
Mm-hmm.
weren't there, or the
Right.
count could have been even
Thank
higher.
goodness. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, like, to break this cycle, I think we need several things. I wrote about this on the most recent Substack,
I read
but
it. Yeah.
so we need our leaders to, preemptively make a non-aggression pact, saying violence is beyond the pale.
It's not going to
Well,
happen.
right.
It's
Well,
not going to happen. It's not the MO of the MAGA Republicans. It is not. They don't want an end to political violence. They want it. Like, this is the thing. I don't care what they say. When Mike Lee is disseminating crap from Alex Jones and Mike
right.
Cernovich talking about how No, no, no. The shooter, the Minnesota assassin, he was a leftist. He was
Right,
working on the orders of Tim Walz.
right.
That is going to get more people killed. That is going to get more people freaking shot. And so you have a long-standing U.S. senator. What are you going to say to him? That he's going to go, "Oh, I didn't realize." Nothing. Maybe if Mitt Romney smacks him upside the head.
I think he's past that point now. But, it's interesting because Mike Lee, while I never agreed with him politically, obviously, he used to be a serious man. And now he is not only unserious, dangerous.
Hey, you heard from Lindsey Graham lately? He sound like the Lindsey Graham he used to pal around, with Johnny Mac. Yeah.
But there's a certain patheticness to Lindsey Graham that Mike Lee,
Well, that's true.
he retains that dangerous edge that Lindsey Graham does not have.
Yeah.
But, and it certainly has something to do with his internet use, to go back to your earlier point. But, I want to ask you, Evan, do you still feel like America is a serious nation that can be the beacon of, freedom and democracy that it used to be, even as recently as 10 years ago?
It's going to take work, but I believe it. Yeah. Yeah. If I didn't believe that, then I just, throw up my hands, right? I can't.
Right.
No, this is America's an idea, and it's one of the best ideas in history. Okay. So America could be reduced to like two, it could be like a Handmaid's Tale. It could be Alaska and Hawaii, and America would still exist as long as we adhere to the principles that make America America. And those principles are still held sacrosanct by the majority of people in this country. They are. And the majority of the rest of the world, at least, the democratic world, small d democratic world, wants us to be better. They don't like it when America is like this. It doesn't serve their interests. Maybe some people, who like to crap post about things, just cynical, I'm going to go stereotypic. We expected this of America. It was going to happen eventually. Okay, fine. Those people, most people who understand what the post World War II liberal democratic order has brought to the world, do
Right.
not want to see that abandoned.
Right. Right.
So the question is how? How does it come back? And boy, if I had an answer to that, I'd be selling it on late night TV because
There you go. Right.
It's going to take work, and it's going to take strength,
Right.
and organization. That's what it's. Because we are in very scary times, and I think that it would behoove everybody to understand, like you've been getting at, the Rubicon has been crossed.
It has.
Every 80 years this happens. 1776, 1775, 76. 80 years later was the Civil War. 80 years later was World War II. Guess when World War II was? 80 years ago.
Right.
Not my theory. That's the Strauss-Howe generational theory. Look it up. They coined the term millennial, but that's it. We are there. We are in the crisis of our lifetimes, of multiple generations' lifetimes.
Right. Right.
And as always, it is an existential. Do we come out of it intact and with the character that the United States is supposed to have? I think we can. I think there's going to be more bloodshed. I think that there is going to be turmoil. I think there is going to be an economic price to pay for the chaos and incompetence that has engulfed our entire executive branch, and for the fecklessness of the Republican-led Congress.
Right.
But I've been saying this to people. In 1942, it was over, man. It was over. The world was over. The Nazis were, the Japanese Empire, the Soviet Empire, and the Nazi Empire were just going to carve up the world. Freedom was done. Every Jew was going to get killed. Every homosexual in Europe was going to get killed. And that was it, right? That was going to be it. We were going to be the United States and have to negotiate away our freedoms to remain relevant in the world.
Right.
Well, 3 years later, it was a little different. 3 years later, looked a bit brighter,
Right. Right.
So that's it, Yeah.
One thing you mentioned, the theory of the 80 years. It seems to me that with each of those eras, some form of spiritual revival.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in the post-war eras, the whole Billy Graham crusade thing and all that was attached to that, Fulton Sheen for a certain type of people.
Second Great Awakening after the American Revolution, yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly. Do you have any sense? Because I know you're a spiritual man, among other things. I've been, for myself, I've been committed to sort of finding practices in the Buddhist tradition that might be adaptable to this situation. Do you have any sort of sense of like how that sort of there's a spiritual yearning underneath all of this?
Oh, yes. Oh,
And,
yes,
and
absolutely. And it reminds me of the quote from the American president, right? I mean, people crave leadership. They'll crawl through the desert for it. And when they don't find it, they'll drink the sand, right?
right.
That great Michael J. Fox line. And Lewis. Yeah, there you go. And there's truth to that. There is increasing truth, though, to the rejoinder by President Andy Shepard, which is they don't drink the sand because they're thirsty. They drink it because they don't know the difference.
Okay. There
You
you go.
see this guy, Vance, whatever his name was. I wish I had his name.
Bolter, I believe.
Yeah, Bolter. Yeah, Vance Bolter. Just came back from Africa preaching against abortion and LGBTQ rights. Now, as somebody who is currently in a Master of Theological Studies program at Boston College, and who is a member in good standing with my Episcopal congregation, but mollycoddles. They need to stop being such
Right.
mollycoddles.
All right.
Right now, there are people doing wonderful things. They are trying to inhabit the ministry and teachings of Jesus, which we all know, pretty liberal by today's political standards.
That's right.
But they're so turned off by the overt politicization of evangelical churches and the Baptists that they want to do the opposite. They retreat into like, we're not going to engage at all. We're going to encourage things. We're going to like donate to things, and we're going to like be sanctuary places for people who are about to be kicked out of the country unfairly and stuff like that. They don't. Let me put it like this. In 2020, Donald Trump used a phalanx of soldiers to walk to St. John's Church, an Episcopal church that had been graffitied and somebody had tried to burn it because those people are stupid too. Again, have no love for the far left, held a Bible like it was burning his fingers, like, holds it upside down. Someone asks, is that your Bible? He goes, it's a Bible. It's a Bible, real man of God. And the response was like, that's not cool. But there was no massive outrage. There was no actual response in the public sphere from the Episcopal Church, which, though its numbers are dwindling, still has millions of members. There could have been an organized, non-political, however, publicly engaging response to that, but they're not going to do that.
Well, let's end on that many people are trying to find ways to make the teachings of the Beatitudes, for instance,
Yes,
something that's alive today.
absolutely. You know what I will say, though? I will follow it up. Jesus was contradictory, but maybe not contradictory in terms of how he handled things like this, because he preached nonviolence, but he did overturn the money changers' tables during the cleansing of the temple and like whipped people out of the thing. Like, he's not trying to kill anybody, he's just like making them uncomfortable. And he also said to his disciples, sell your cloaks and buy swords. But at the time it came when they would have used the swords, he told them to put them away. For those who live by the sword shall die by the sword. It might behoove us not to meditate on violence, but it might behoove us to metaphorically maybe get ourselves some swords. I mean, we'll say this. Shooting's fun. Like, I like target shooting. Guns are fun. Go get familiarity with a gun. It doesn't mean you have to buy one. It doesn't mean you have to use it ever. And if you're in a state where, you need special licensing, definitely don't freaking carry it where you shouldn't be carrying it. Our opponents are essentially cowards. That's why they have to act this way.
Right.
The person who drove an SUV into a crowd did so as the crowd was dispersing. At one of the protests I went, one of the No Kings protests I went to on Saturday, a car full of like 19-year-old, D-bags came by and started shouting like, fuck your feelings, Trump, President Trump and stuff. When there were like 10 people left, as opposed to the 500 people who had been there earlier. They're cowards. And so if we show that we won't be quailed, that might do some to reduce the temperature, because as long as they think they got like bad boy Trump and all of the everybody behind them, they're emboldened. If it's just one lone idiot against 500 of us, they're not going to do a damn thing.
I wonder if we need the swords or the guns to show that we're not quailed.
I don't know. Ask the people at Lexington and Concord.
All right.
That was it was in a storehouse. They had the guns in a storehouse, but when the storehouse was going to be raided by the British regulars, then they got frisky. That's the whole thing. Is like, I'm not saying let's go start crap. I'm saying why don't we have an armory?
All right.
I could be metaphorical about that, but see, that's the thing. You're very uncomfortable with that. Except I'm really uncomfortable with 20,000 army soldiers basically saying they will shoot us if Trump orders it, regardless of what else we're doing. If you're not made uncomfortable by that, then we're not in 2025. Like, that's really, really, really fucking scary.
Right. I think
that's 2 divisions of soldiers basically saying, we'll kill you on a thin pretext.
But I really think the response to that is to double down on the institutional authority, right? I mean, like,
if it's still left.
Well,
I mean, you know that the new civil service exam has 2 questions on it, and one of those questions is name 2 of the president's executive orders, why they speak to you, and how you will, in your job, advance the president's agenda. Nonpartisan civil servants. So give that 3.5 years, and you tell me what our institutions are going to be looking like and how we're going to rely on our institutions as a guardrail.
I don't think I have a little more faith in that, and I think
I have faith. I would rather be, as I've always said, I'd rather be Chicken Little than the canary in the coal mine.
There you go. All right.
So if I sound a little wacky on this one, then so be it. But you know what? People have been telling me I sound wacky on this for a decade, and the shit I've been wacky about keeps coming to pass. So.
All right. Well, I'm
sorry for that. I think it's going to work out. It will work out better if we keep having conversations like this. If the fair deal Democrats become more prominent in the party, and if we just realize that we're in a dangerous situation, so we do need to be very deliberate about what we do, but we cannot just close our eyes and ears to the fact that we are in a very precarious time. So that's it.
Indeed. I can definitely agree with that. Evan, thank you so much for your time.
Josh, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yes.
All right. I look forward to seeing you again soon.